Welcome to the Evolving Warfighter. My name is Dr. Franklin Annis. Today I have a rather special guest with me today, a singer and songwriter that goes by the stage name Fred Smith. And we're going to talk about using music to kind of describe some wartime experiences. This gentleman found himself in Afghanistan working with the Australian military, but he wasn't a soldier himself. Could you explain to the audience how you found yourself in Afghanistan?
Yeah, sure. Well, I work for our foreign ministry, which is the equivalent of your State Department. And around about 2009, we came to understand that if there were solutions to the problems in Afghanistan, they had to be political as well as military. And so countries started to send diplomats in to work alongside their soldiers. And I was working in the Foreign Affairs Department on a Thursday afternoon, or rather I was asleep at my desk when I got a tap on my shoulder, and 2 months later I showed up in Uruzgan province, which is down south of Afghanistan, just north of Kandahar, just east of Helmand province. And that was where Australian troops were concentrated. You know how it was, different NATO countries took on different provinces as part of a kind of international division of labour. And whereas I guess US soldiers were all around Afghanistan, Australian and Dutch soldiers found themselves in this little province of Uruzgan, and so I ended up spending two years there working alongside Australian soldiers.
Okay.
And US soldiers too, actually. I shared a tent up at a forward operating base for 2 months with some National Guardsmen from South Carolina.
Oh, outstanding. So it's kind of ironically almost the same timeline you found yourself in Afghanistan. I was sitting over in Iraq.
Yeah, 2009, 2010, then I went back in 13 at the end there.
When I dance, I wanna dance like an Afghan, dance like the Afghans dance. You never know what's gonna happen tomorrow. This could be our last chance. So shake your hips and swing your hands to heaven. Let your feet pound the dusty floor. Awake in the morning to tea and some flatbread. Get stuck back into the war.
I noticed that your songs, at least when I listen to them, they remind me very much of kind of some of the poets of World War I, whether it's Siegfried Sassoon, Wilfred Owen. I think that through generations, people have been trying to use arts to better communicate their kind of experiences over there. But do you think that kind of the arts are a kind of effective means of dealing with kind of the stress of combat, or trying to communicate what the experience is over there?
Yeah, I think they're very useful for both, any way that you can tell your story and make yourself understood is good for you. I think it's good for your sanity to be able to clear your mind and explain it. But I think I found coming back to Australia, people here don't really, they want to know what it was like for our soldiers in Afghanistan, but they really can't get a sense of it from the television news, which is always, 1 minute of footage every time there's a ramp ceremony. But I find by playing these songs, and I write my songs generally through the eyes of soldiers, just using their language and the things they see and the events that they're explaining and relating. And that enables people in the audience who haven't been to Afghanistan or would never go there to look at the situation through another pair of eyes,
Yep. Well, and I'll definitely get into it a little further in this interview. I can definitely say some of your music captured that experience so well. When I first heard your songs, I had naturally assumed that you were a soldier versus some other role, just because you capture some of the minutiae of warfare quite well.
Yeah, it's the details, isn't it? I was just, I was immersed. Like I said, I was sharing a tent for 2 months with National Guardsmen from South Carolina. I didn't understand all their use of the Queen's English, but
well,
I got
a fair bit of it. The Queen's English.
Yeah, the U.S. Army has its own kind of English, but But I got used to that and to the language of the Australian soldiers and to their reality, and you can only get that through a couple of years of immersion.
But you can push a man just so far before he'll turn and fight. Doesn't always matter if he's right. Promise me one thing. You will bury me under God's will.
When I first ran across your music, it was, I would think, probably 3 or 4 years ago, and it wasn't actually about one of your war songs. It was the song "Don't Dig Your Grave Too Deep," which is kind of a modern song about a Confederate Civil War veteran dealing with the aftermath of the war. And I know that you've written another song about the American Civil War. And you actually came over to the United States to spend some time before you had your experiences in Afghanistan. Do you think that kind of the American music approach had an influence on your songwriting at all?
Oh, definitely. I think the kind of songs I write, the medium I'm working in was very much one invented in the United States. That way of relating war stories through the first person. Perhaps I've also been influenced by English and Australian writers like Eric Bogle, but definitely that American approach is deeply ingrained into my my musical experience, And I mean, I have written American Civil War songs. I think it was the most amazing historical event, incredible destruction, 620,000 soldiers killed. It's a remarkable story. It's a tough start to a nation, for sure.
Oh yeah, it's interesting in context with the rest of the world because it was a blessing that America wasn't really a superpower at the time or anything close to it, because if something like that ever occurred again, you'd have far more risk of invasion than other foreign countries trying to take advantage of the situation. So it was definitely an interesting historical context, and still remains the most lethal war in American history, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, more American soldiers killed in the Civil War than all wars since. It's extraordinary. There are a number of reasons for that, but it's an amazing story, and there are millions of stories within those. But I think that's the key thing to writing these kind of songs and stories is you can recount a statistic like 620,000 fatalities, but people are more moved by the story of one person or two people, or whatever it might be, two soldiers. And that's what you've got to do when you're writing songs or telling stories or making art, is really break it down to the human experience of one or two people.
Well, there's nothing about the province that's remotely fair or just, but worse than the corruption is the endless dust, fine as talcum powder on the ground and in the air, that gets into your eyes, that gets into your hair, gets into your weapon, gets into your boots. When the bureaucrats all show up there, it gets into their suits, gets in the machinery, foils every plan. Well, there's something quite symbolic about the dust of Ur's gang.
Now, you wrote music and songs before you arrived in Afghanistan, but was there any type of event in Afghanistan or cause that made you realize, like, hey, I need to start writing about what's happening here, my experiences here? And did it cause you to take your songwriting more seriously than you had in the past?
Yeah, I'm sure it did. Before that I was doing a lot of comedy and playing in bars and stuff, and so naturally I was singing drinking songs. But the first thing that happened when I arrived in Afghanistan was I attended a ramp ceremony for a young soldier, 22-year-old soldier named Ben Ronaldo, a kid from the state of Victoria here in Australia who'd been killed by an IED up in one of the valleys of the province, and I arrived and thought, "Oh man, this is serious. This is we're not mucking around here. This is really serious." And anyway, I settled in there and got to work and put my guitar under the bed because I didn't want the soldiers to think I was a flaky hippie guitar player. and then I just got working there, and eventually I found out what happened to the guy, and one of the things the Taliban did was they'd have one bomb, one IED connected to, say, an anti-personnel mine by detonation cord. And I eventually found out that one of his friends accidentally triggered an AP, anti-personnel mine, which was connected to the IED, which killed Ben. So I ended up writing a song from the point of view of this other soldier, Paul Warren, who was unlucky enough to trigger the anti-personnel mine and lost his right leg, but also had to deal with the blaming himself for what happened. It wasn't his fault. He couldn't have seen the IED. They couldn't find the thing. It was concealed by the dust. But that's how I got to write the song "Dust of Uruzgan." And the dust kind of struck me as a metaphor for the opaqueness of the province. You can't really understand what's going on there. You only really know 20 to 30% of what is going on.
Yeah, the way that song is written, well, definitely Survivor Guild is a kind of the real reality of warfare. But the way that song was written, it did remind me very much of the kind of Eric Vogel, the band played Waltzing Matilda, you're getting to the kind of towards the end of the song, and then you realize, or Eric Vogel's song, what are these men marching for? Like, there's a lost understanding of what the war was fought over. And then in your song, it's that same concept. Like, why are we spilling blood and spending money kind of in Afghanistan? That confusion of, is the price we're paying worth whatever we're getting out of the experience?
Yeah, totally, yeah. Yeah, no, it does. I mean, it's an awkward thing for those of us who participate in these conflicts to always be working on that calculus about whether this is worth it and why are we here and all that sort of stuff. I mean, when you're in there, you can't be thinking about those things. You got to commit to the job and to the risks. And if you're a senior officer, you're sending soldiers out to where they could get killed. You got to believe in it. And yet, I think we've got to remain skeptical and make judgments about whether we're really in a position to help and make things different there. So it's an awkward challenge, I think, for soldiers and civilians working in these environments is trying to work out whether it's worth it and what it's all about and why.
And Langer's won selection. Daniel Keegren got a gong. Abbott won the election. And Fred Smith got his song. Those who get these accolades deserve all that they get, but Crash did not deserve to die at the Battle of Derapet. And I moved back to Brisbane and got out on Civvy Street. Now I'm working in this mine, mate, in this mess where miners eat. I'm married now with children to a woman named Regret. It's the price you pay for a summer's day in the fields of Derapet.
So your song Derapet tells the story of the unfortunate death of Lance Corporal Jared Crash McKinney. And this is a song that when I first heard it, I really thought that you had been a soldier, just because the detail you go down to about talking about the machine gun he was carrying, just the utter fatigue of trying to kind of sprint with a medium machine gun must be horrific in combat. I've never done it in combat. I've done it in training, but just the sheer fatigue is communicated so well. Again, this song communicates kind of that survivor's guilt as a soldier's running forward, trying to get this machine gun into a fight, finds himself physically exhausted just by getting into combat and having another soldier grab the weapon to take it forward, and that soldier or Crash ends up dying. And kind of the trauma of dealing with, you know, I should have been kind of stronger, I should have been there, he shouldn't have had that weapon, he shouldn't have been moving forward. It's definitely a very powerful song. And just, yeah, just an amazing song, I must say. But could you tell
Yeah,
me-
no, it came slowly to me, that song. I went to Jared Crash McKinney's ramp service back in late August of 2010, and I remember sitting there listening to the commanding officer talk about this soldier and what had happened and how he'd been killed, and thinking he deserved a song. But then I never had a pair of eyes to see the situation through until I got an email like 2 years later when I was back here in Australia from that soldier who initially had the Maximi machine gun, you know, the one you mentioned, asking me to write it, you know. And so I put all the details together from his email and from things I knew and the reports I'd read and things like that. And then it took another year and a half to all fall out, but it did in the end. Yeah. So, yeah, but it seems to me a story about just how much chance is involved in battle. You know, that guy Jared McKinney, like he was wearing full body armor, but the round went in through his shoulder and into his chest cavity and killed him. Yep. But then there's another soldier in the fight who saw this happening, and he saw that, like, Jared McKinney's friends were working on him doing CPR, first aid, and they came under heavy fire. They got pinned down, and this second soldier, though, so a third soldier, I guess, a guy called Daniel Kieran, saw this happening, and he ran up and down a hill 3 times to distract fire from the Taliban. And it worked. You know, the Taliban opened fire on this guy, Dan Kieran, from a range of about 100 meters. You look at the helmet camera footage, and there's bullets bouncing around everywhere. But by opening fire, they lost fire discipline, which enabled our armored vehicles on an adjacent hill to figure out where the Taliban were positioned, and they hit that tree line with 25 millimeter incendiary rounds and won the battle. So this guy Kieran emerges as a hero for his incredible act of courage, but he was really lucky to not to get shot. You know, so it's just so much luck that goes on in these things. And so I guess my message is, you know, if something goes wrong, if you had a bad day at the office, don't blame yourself.
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting line in there that you talk about, essentially the kill count, saying, hey, we lost this soldier, and then we killed X number of people, so therefore, you know, we killed enough enemy that we can say we won the battle. But that kind of weird sensation that just the losses doesn't equal up, like, you know.
Yeah, the calculus of it is too weird, isn't it? It's too hard to think about. Yeah, no, it's to lose one soldier is too many. You know how it is, but that's war. You know, you take your chances, don't you?
I don't know how I'm gonna fit back home. Been out here now so long, this is what I know. Brother, thanks for your ear. Life is easier out here. It's loving family I fear. Now I'm gone.
So you wrote a song called Going Home, and it's a very good, very beautiful song. It kind of has a melancholy sound to it, and I think that soldiers have this awkward emotion of somewhat enjoying war in terms of adoring the closeness of relationships and kind of the truth of warfare that gets communicated between soldiers. Like, I always explain it to like my family. Like, I never had to ask if anyone was kind of brave or cowardice in war. Like, you could see it on their face. So there was more of an honesty. Everybody was focused kind of on this specific task, and whether you loved the guy or hated the guy next to you, you were always kind of fighting for each other in such a strong family together that sometimes the experience of going home can be terrifying because you'll lose that relationship. But, you know, you really just want to go home and see the family, and it's just kind of this unknown, what's life post-combat going to be like, and can I make it back to who I could have been or who I was before I left.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, well, first of all, war is great fun until it isn't, you know. But secondly, one of my favorite writers about the war in Afghanistan and others is Sebastian Junger. Have you read his stuff? I think he writes for the New York Times, but one of his theories is that one of the real challenges of coming back, like you say, is just that soldiers miss the camaraderie, the close proximity of guys you know and trust, you know. Whereas we live in these suburban lives, and it's kind of lonely out here in the suburbs. So I totally understand that. I mean, frankly, I loved working in Afghanistan. But I'm happy to be home now. I had a little daughter when I came back, and that changes everything.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true. Did you even notice a behavior in yourself? Because obviously being like a non-combatant, did you have, even then, did you have a shift in kind of your mentality about how you approach life? Or?
Yeah, it's something I've got better at over the years. I've worked in other conflicts zones in the South Pacific, like Solomon Islands and Bougainville. And so I'm kind of a bit accustomed to coming back, you know what I mean? And it's partly a grieving process, you know, when you're working in these places, you get so completely immersed and fascinated and absorbed in the details, and you start to care about the details and all that. And then you know, 48 hours later, you're in a place where those details no longer matter, and all that reality that you invested in is just irrelevant. And your family doesn't know about it, and your friends don't know about it, and don't necessarily care about it. And so, there's a kind of grieving process that you have to go through when you get back, and you just got to kind of realize that you're in two different worlds. You were in one 48 hours ago, and you're in another world now, and making that throwing that switch in your head takes a bit of practice.
It's quite interesting that, well, I only had one chance to go deploy, but I've heard that sentiment that if you kind of have a repeat occurrence, sometimes it becomes easier. You just become more accustomed to kind of the reintegration part on the way back home.
Yeah, well, I noticed with the Australian soldiers, the older soldiers did a better job of it than the younger soldiers. The old warrant officers who'd done it a million times before were much better at making those transitions, and much better at making phone calls home. You know, I remember, you know, hearing young soldiers talking to their girlfriends and wives back home, and there'd always be sort of unhappy arguments and all sorts of stuff. But the older dogs seem to know about what to do.
Well, at least in the American Army, they're wise enough to pair up the extremely young officers with really experienced sergeants, which kind of gives that kind of mentoring, training relationship. I know that I depended a lot on my platoon sergeant, and he had quite a bit of experience in that regard, and gave me quite a bit of wisdom when I was sitting over in Iraq in those matters.
Oh yeah, the old sergeants and the warrant officers, they got a lot of common sense and experience, don't they?
Yes.
So soldiers, sing me your sapper's lullaby. You give it your all, knowing if you should fall, that all good things must die.
So probably one of the most powerful songs you have is called Sapper's Lullaby, and it honestly brings tears and emotion to me every time I listen to it. Now, it tells of, again, the loss of two of your sappers that were killed in an IED blast clearing a pathway. It would be interesting to hear your response about writing songs about the fallen. Like, how are your songs received kind of by the soldier community, the veteran community, and even the families? Like, what type of responses have you gotten out of your music?
Yeah, well, I'm always kind of sensitive to that because I don't want to invade anyone's privacy, but my general experience has been that people are grateful to have these things recorded. That song, Sapper's Lullaby, came to me pretty quick, like it was the 7th of June 2010, two of our sappers were on patrol out in the Mirabad Valley and they saw an IE, something dangerous on the side of the street, and they approached it and it blew up and killed them and their dog. And these were young guys, and they brought their bodies back into the hospital at the provincial capital, Tarankout, and everyone on the base grieved. Like, two young guys had been killed out of nowhere. It was kind of surprising. And then I went to their ramp ceremony 2 days later on the 9th of June. And yeah, it's just incredible just to sit there in front of these caskets where these young men are lying, and you feel the pain of the family back home. And the guys' friends were back in from the forward operating base into the provincial, the main fob there, and we could see them weeping. And so I wrote the song that afternoon at the ramp service, and then we actually played it with the guys. Like, I put a little band together and we played a concert that weekend at the rec area, and the guys who'd been on that patrol were in the room listening to the song, and it was a powerful experience for all of us. And but I've since got to know the parents of the two sappers involved, and we're good friends actually. Snowy Moreland's mum and dad were down here a couple of weeks ago. And we got into my garden and built a veggie patch together. But yeah, mostly I think people are grateful that the story is told.
Well, I find it interesting putting it kind of in a song format, and I wonder if that version of memorializing these soldiers will last and have a more resounding impact into the future versus other type of memorials. Because I think that songs kind of, I don't know, maybe carry more of an emotional load that can be sustained throughout the year, that you go back and listen to, World War II songs and still understand them versus just seeing a plaque on the wall somewhere.
Yeah, well, I think so. I hope so. I mean, I certainly listen to a lot of, like I said, like a lot of American Civil War songs, and they're as moving now as they ever were. I guess it just humanizes something, doesn't it? It makes this is what I find. I mean, I play my songs around Australia. I'd like to get over the States sometime, but I play them in Australia, and the families of soldiers and soldiers themselves really like the songs, but also, people in the folk music scene who are otherwise pretty anti-war and suspicious of our interventions in this war, that they appreciate the songs too. So I think there's something about the human story that kind of transcends the political, and God, don't we need that at the moment?
Oh, that's very true. Well, and I think that some of your music, I'm trying to think of one of your most recent songs, "Live Like an Afghan." Like, you usually don't hear a lot of the positive aspects over there, and I think that song right there kind of gives a different image of Afghanistan, and how, even though there's errors in that culture, what we view as major errors, you can say, like, hey, there's some, I don't know if you call them virtues, but some really great characteristics, and if we understood more and put it more in context, we might understand this problem a little bit better.
Yeah. I guess my role was a little different from the soldiers insofar as it was my job to make friendships with local Afghans and deal with them, the political figures and the warlords, so I developed a bit of sympathy for them. I mean, their lives are hard. The life expectancy there is 44 compared to 82 in Australia. They live short, sharp and brutal lives, and incredibly competitive travel environment, and scarcity of resources, and all of that. I'm not saying they're perfect. I think there are inbuilt sort of contradictions. You could call them hypocrisies in the culture, but on the whole, they're pretty resilient, tough people, and they live with a fierce intensity appropriate for such short, sharp lives, I guess. And like, in a way, I kind of admired them, but I'm glad I'm not one of them.
I can definitely understand that sentiment.
Yeah. Yeah, they're hospitality is a big part of the culture, courtesy, a big part of the Afghan culture, and they can be quite funny sometimes, But the contradictions are there, and that's just what I was trying to tease out with the song.
I got a sweet little daughter to a woman that I love, and when a man has got a family, feeling lucky ain't enough. And now I've had enough, I can't take anymore. Home is where I want to be, home far away from this forsaken war, not fighting from the Brugge FOB.
So from your actual role there in Afghanistan, do you have any advice that you'd like to give kind of young military leaders?
Yeah, I guess what I'd say is, to understand when you're part of an intervening force like that, if we ever get involved in something like that again, I guess you arrive thinking that you're there to defeat terrorists, or you're there to build the government or spread freedom, but through local eyes they see you as a source of power and resources in their own struggle with one another. And that kind of shapes more of what happens, and and how your actions affect the things on the ground than anything you might have in your own mind about counter-terrorist activities or what any other purpose. You just need to understand how you are perceived by them, and make sure you talk to more than one person, because everyone on the ground there's got a different point of view, and if you just listen to the one person, they will take advantage of you.
That's almost true in every context.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Brothers blown apart on land and sea, gave their blood, their hearts, their liberties, slaves then free at last. And so were we on the wind and the wind of the road.
For the audience listening to you, I know that you have a website, but is there a good way to find you, your work, the schedule of kind of your concerts or your music?
Yeah, so my website's fredsmith.com.au. But if you YouTube Fred Smith, Dust of Uruzgan, or Fred Smith, Sapper's Lullaby, or Fred Smith, Derapet, you see some of my songs there. But yeah, come and find me at my website, and I hope to get back to the States sometime and play. I love playing over there. I lived there for 3 years, based out of DC for a while there, back in 2004, 5, 6. Really enjoyed it. I got a lot of good friends over in the States, so I hope to get back sometime.
Definitely let me know if you get back in the DC area.
Oh, you're in DC, huh?
Yeah, I currently am, yes.
Great. Yeah, I will. Yeah, I will.
I definitely thank you for taking the time with me for this interview. I think that no soldier would ever want to die on a battlefield, but I think that it's kind of a secret wish of the soldiers that go into combat, that if we have to die, that we do something worthy of remembrance when we die, and it's not just some accident. But I couldn't think of a better honor for the men that you captured their memory in their songs, to have such beautiful music written about them, and hopefully it will help their memories survive for decades, if not centuries to come. So from one soldier, from me, I just want to say thank you for doing that for your soldiers, and then I truly wish you and your family the best, and look forward to hearing more of your music.
Well, thanks, Franklin. Really a pleasure talking to you.
For the audience out there, I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I invite you to subscribe to the Evolving Warfighter for more videos on the topic of military self-development and military history. I also invite you to take a look at this link for more of the music of Fred Smith. Until next time, focus on your self-development so we can ensure that we can dominate the modern battlefield.